Welcome to Lancefield on the Line. My name is David Lancefield, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with Liz Wiseman, the New York Times best-selling author and executive advisor. And Liz, you are, of course, the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm HQ'd in Silicon Valley, California. And you work with the rock stars, the stars of the corporate world. And in 2021, Thinkers 50 rightly gave you the award again of being one of the world's leading management thinkers. Congratulations for that. And welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, David. All of that just sounds better when you say it.
Well, it's all true. At least you've written it, so I've captured it. It's all true. But very importantly, you've also written a book, your fourth book, called Impact Players: How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. And that's the focus of today's discussion. And I read all of it, as I do with any books that I cover. Really love the clarity, the structure, the substance. I mean, it's intensely researched. I mean, you interviewed more than 170 leaders, and you didn't stop there. You asked them who they admired, and you went on, and it's packaged beautifully, and it's just full of practical tips that literally, as you're turning the page, you start using it. And in my case, thinking, why am I not so much of an impact player as I thought I was? But anyway, we're going to focus on the positive today, and we're going to talk, of course, about the mindset, the habits, the practices of impact players, and what can we learn from them, and how do we nurture them in our organization if we have a leadership role, and indeed our network. So, and of course, as with any Lancefield on the Line interview, we might just talk about you and your own practices. So from the book to Liz Wiseman, there we go. So let's just frame it in terms of the concept for people listening and watching, and then we'll obviously dig in. You describe impact players, and I quote, as standout contributors who create extraordinary value everywhere they work. And you distinguish them from other groups, two in particular, but I'll focus on one, from typical contributors who are talented and driven, and they deliver solid work. That's a dreadful term, solid, but it's solid work, and it is solid work. But they don't quite hit, in US terms, the home run. So just tell me a bit more about the distinction between, obviously, the impact players and the typical contributors.
Well, let me start with how impressed I was with how managers described not the impact players, but the typical contributors. They said, you know what, they do their job. They do their job well. They follow direction. They take ownership. They take responsibility. They focus. They carry their weight on teams. I'm like, aren't these the kind of ideal team players? And here's what was so fascinating is these typical contributors are absolutely stellar in ordinary times.
Right.
But it was kind of what we might have historically seen as extraordinary times, where the impact players operated very differently than the contributors. And it's where the typical contributors fell short. And, they fell short of the goal. And these were times of uncertainty and ambiguity, and when we're in situations that are out of our control, that feel a little chaotic. And the reality is, this is today's workplace. And there were 5 situations in particular that the impact players handled very differently than contributors. And, the book is kind of built around these 5 situations. And to just sort of frame it, the difference is, in dealing with messy problems that don't fit neatly into the org chart, people's responsibilities, most people do their job. Here's my part of that. And they do their job well, where the impact player doesn't just do their job, they do the job that needs to be done. The thing they're rangy. They work outside the box. Let's put it that way. We talk about thinking outside the box. They work outside the box. Their job descriptions probably more like a job suggestion, like a base camp. Like, I'm going to this is where I kind of hang out and do my stuff. But when I see problems, I go out and I go after them.
They're also savvy. Sorry to get you, but they're also savvy enough to bring people with them, right? They don't just do it as like a maverick.
Yeah, I like to think of it. I have a son who's a real big rock climber, high altitude climber, and he does a lot of backcountry stuff alone. And, one of our deals is, you can do that, but you got to take out a permit. Like, just always let someone know where you're going, which is, okay, of course you're going to go on the adventure, but make sure you check in with someone so people know where you are. And it's the same kind of thing. It's like, if I'm going to work outside of my job, like, oh, you know what? That's not really officially my responsibility, but it's important and it needs to be done. And I can contribute. Let me go work on that. But let me just let people know where I'm going. And maybe even give people a chance to say, you know what? Someone else is on that. We need you to cover this. And it's not that they shirk their jobs. It's they extend it. They kind of extend the range. So that's one of the differences. The second is how they deal with unclear roles, where it's just, we're working together, but it's unclear who's in charge. And, most people in that they're uncomfortable with unclear roles. Most of us are. The typical contributors tend to look up for role clarification. They wait for direction, like someone tell me I'm the boss.
Yes.
Whereas the impact players, they tend to step up and fill that leadership void, but they don't stay there forever. They kind of step up, they take charge, but when that job is done, they roll back and in many ways, they follow others as easily as they take the lead and lead others.
That's a great lot. There's a lot of flexibility there in their mindset and I guess a tolerance for a certain degree of risk, but a real focus as well. I mean, one of the things in terms of focus on what needs to be done, as opposed to a sort of a box in terms of a role and I'm waiting now for orders. They sort of step forward. There's something about being proactive throughout their sort of in their work life.
Oh, there's something about being proactive. There's something about being self-directed, self-managing. There's kind of a theme across all the impact player behaviors that there's a little bit of healthy disregard for the rules and formality and structure. And I think there's a confidence, like it takes confidence in a leaderless situation to say, I'll lead us.
Yes.
I'll lead this initiative, or, oh, this is ambiguous. I'll take charge. But I think it also takes a fair bit of confidence to decide that you don't have to always be in charge.
Yes. Yes. I mean, one of the things I really liked about the book is you had some FAQs at the back, the frequently asked questions. And so that was a test for me to make sure I don't ask any of those, so I can have something different. But I love that part of the book. But let me ask a question on that, which is, you talk there about nurture and nature in the book, but I'm curious about how much there's a sort of positive relationship between experience in whatever context and the likelihood of being an impact player. Or are there just impact players that either are quick learners and they come through the ranks? Are you more likely to find people with, don't want to be too ageist, 10 to 20 years of experience being impact players, or can they come through the ranks and as upstarts, if you like, positive upstarts?
Yeah, I try to be a pretty good researcher and be thorough in the analytics. And so we tracked the age of all 170 people who are identified as impact players. We're tracking gender and ethnicity and age. And what we found was this really wonderful distribution in that the 170 impact players identified, there were people in late career, mid-career, early career. In fact, the data skewed just a little bit toward early career. And, I think some of this is how you were raised, whether it's how you were raised in your family and the household you grew up in, but also how you're raised at university, or how you're raised early in the workplace. But, I've seen teenagers who kind of just show up with this mentality. I was speaking at a youth conference, and one of the students she was not even part of the organizing team. I was there up preparing to get ready to speak. And, you always get, when you get ready to speak, someone's always going to come up and ask you to do something for them. And you're like, oh God, this is the most inopportune time for you to start a conversation with me. I'm like really trying to get ready. And this one teenager came up and she said, her name was Abby, Liz, how can I make myself useful right now?
Oh, what a great question. What a great question.
Moment, like, am I being punked? Am I on camera? Because that's like the phrase that I use to describe impact players is they, in any given situation, they're looking around, how could I be useful?
Yes.
Which is all about context. It's all about what else is happening around me. And where can I add value in this situation? And to see a 14-year-old girl like understand that she could be useful.
Yeah, that's remarkable. That is utterly remarkable. I'm curious about the organizational context in which impact players work and clearly flourish, and how much, if you like, that matters, because there are many large corporate traditional organizations that are candidly very bureaucratic. And my starting hypothesis would be, gosh, they must really squash or hinder the evolution of these impact players and their lives. Is that a reasonable hypothesis, or actually are these impact players able to overcome the inertia of such a bureaucratic organization?
Well, I do think context matters. And, there are some organizations that their culture gives people permission to be impactful. Like the culture would say, you know what, you don't need to wait to have the formal job title as manager or director. Like you can step into a leadership vacuum and just, you could anoint yourself a leader. Or you can, if you see like a meeting where you could be helpful, like, you know what, ask if you can attend or show up uninvited, as I've done, in the past in my own career. And you're not going to get your hand slapped for that. And then there's cultures that very much encourage it. So yeah, I think a bureaucracy is going to make it very difficult. Like people spend their energy wading through bureaucratic sludge rather than making an impact. So yes, I think the culture of an organization matters, and context matters as well. Some people though would say, well, I can't really be an impact player because I'm not passionate about what the organization's about. Like this isn't my jam, not my thing. And, sure, context matters. You could say, well, I'm going to go work in an organization that naturally brings out my best. Their mission is something I align with, or their culture is very enabling.
Yes.
But I think the impact player mentality is really about waking up, understanding the context you're in, and saying, how can I bring my best to this context?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, because I can still think of individuals in the organizations I described actually doing an amazing job, where if you looked at it, however, from another lens of a different organizational context, how did they possibly do it? But they worked out how to break enough of the rules to do the things you just described. I'm curious. I mean, I looked through the list of organizations you've worked with and work for now. I mean, they're, as I say, the amazingly successful organizations. They often have very strong characters at the top and throughout. The founders of the organizations or executives. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to embarrass you or them, but I know of situations where actually the culture is very enabling of impact players, and other times it's very much of sort of mirror images, mini-me's. So how pivotal have impact players been to the success of, the rock star tech companies that you worked with and work for now?
Well, I think, I've spent my career here in Silicon Valley, and, in the work that I've done studying multiplying versus diminishing leaders, I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the key ingredients that cause some organizations to achieve success? And then what are the attributes that cause them to sustain success? And, when you look at the startup world, like the startup world is built around sort of geniuses and impact players, like someone with a smart idea and a handful of people who are like, I'm going to run through brick walls. I'm going to make this happen. And it is something like in the VC world, people are always looking for, okay, there was a success here, but who were the impact players? Who were the people around whom this wouldn't have happened had they not been there, versus the people who just happened to have been there?
Yeah, that's a great frame.
But, for an organization to achieve sustain success, you can't just have a handful of impact players. You've got to build an organizational culture where everyone's contributing at their best. And I think this is one of the key transitions that organizations have to get beyond. And you can see, like just here in Silicon Valley, you can go around and look at the organizations that are stuck in this startup genius-led mentality versus those that have figured out, you may be able to start a company with genius, but you cannot scale a company without genius makers. managers who see the capability in others and put it to work. I just heard a story just Friday, just a couple days ago, and it was an executive vice president, and she was interviewing for a job at an previous to the one she was in, and it was for an executive vice president job, and she's an absolute superstar, and she's interviewing for the job, and at the end they're like, no. She's like, what do you mean no? Because she had laid out, like, here's all these amazing things that I've done, and the CEO said, yeah, you're amazing, everyone knows you're amazing. We'll give her the name of Janice. And he said, I don't need one Janice. I need 100 Janices. And I need the kind of leader who will give me not one, but 100 of them.
I see. Yeah.
Because this executive is still stuck in, I'm the impact player. I'm the star. As opposed to, my job is to enable an environment where people can contribute at their fullest.
Yeah.
And make
so an impact player is not, as you said in your book, actually, right at the back, the impact player is different from a superstar. And actually what you want is that multiplier effect. They may be a star, but not in the conventional sense of, hey, look at me. It's actually the impact across the team, the organization, who they bring behind them, and so forth, as opposed to being an individual standout, which often brings, sometimes with some stars, a degree of followership, yes, in terms of learning, but also a degree of damage, maybe too strong a word, but they're high maintenance, a lot of those individuals, quite difficult to deal with and so on, which after a while, actually, it's the collective impact that matters, right, in the way you said.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I was actually surprised at. So, I've spent my career studying diminishing leaders and, sort of the brilliant jerks. I have a lot of experience with the brilliant jerk type. And when I went in to do these interviews, so 170 managers are going to tell us about an impact player on their team. I thought for sure we'd have a handful of brilliant jerks, kind of the divas, the prima donnas, the rock stars. And what I found, to a person, like, we went through each one of them, none of them were like this. They were all team oriented. They worked in the collective. They were individually brilliant and everyone knew it, but they weren't the kind of people who were high maintenance. They were actually low maintenance. They were, when we surveyed the behaviors, we found there were certain things that these people never did. Politics, drama, like, they don't put think about impact. It's like, I'm going to put all my energy and impact on the work that matters, and none of it, or very little of it, on the work in the periphery.
They know how to contain it, right? I mean, they're all human beings, and they may have a reaction, but it's not a big blowout. It's a sort of, it's contained, and then get on with the job in hand, the job that needs to be done.
And it's an awareness of, I need to understand the system I'm working in. So it's not like a naive way. It's like, oh no, I need to understand who the power brokers are here. And I need to understand where there's energy and how to get behind initiatives that are going to make progress and have momentum and impact. So you're aware of power and energy flows in organizations, but you're not fueling negative dramas. Like, you're not creating the things that stymie progress.
There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in there, in how they operate, these impact players. Wisdom in terms of where they choose to operate, with whom, and quite strategic in terms of how they manage their time, their energy, and their attention. Because one of the things you actually say, we can actually under contribute by over contributing. I guess as a foil to an assumption, which may be, these impact players have to work all hours, they have to burn themselves out. Actually, not at all. They have wisdom as to where and how to play. Yeah.
And I think they're very intentional about it, meaning they're mindful of where they be contributing. And, I think one of the ills of the workplace right now is this sense of obligation, that, like, I'm obligated to do everything I'm asked to do. I'm obligated to respond to every request that comes my way. And, like, you can see people who carry this sense of obligation, and they're like hunched over. And I think the impact player kind of shows up, wakes up with this sense of control of, what, I have a lot of power. In some ways, if I had one wish, for people in the workplace right now is that you show up to work assuming you have far more power than you think you have.
Mm. Mm.
And, for a lot of ways, I've spent, years coaching leaders like, what, by the way, I find most leaders end up having a diminishing effect on others, not because they're power mongers. Maybe some politicians, you might be able to cite a few who maybe are like power.
I wouldn't know.
I don't know who you're talking about, Liz. But I find that most managers underestimate the power that they have on the people around them. And they end up what I've called in, this other book, multipliers, these accidental diminishers.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us, we underestimate the impact we have. We underestimate how much choice we really have in situations. And I don't mean the choice to say, I quit, I'm out of here, you're on your own. It's the choice to say, yeah, I know this is my job, but then there's this important work, and that's really the job to be done.
Yeah.
And I'm going to negotiate my time to go do that. I know no one has asked me to lead, but the situation needs a leader. I have the power to step up, but I also have the power to say, my work here is done, and let me pass this to next person. When things get tough and obstacles drop in our way, and we say, well, I don't have the power to, fix this problem. Let me escalate this up. It's just, I actually do have the power not to necessarily get this done on my own, but I have the power to ask senior executives to help me rather than say, here you go, it's yours. And all of them are just, in many ways, is this assumption of control and power that it's easy to forget that we have.
Yeah. It's a very empowering tone to the book, and it's very moving. Not only the stories that you tell, but the message, which is about, you have more choice, you have more control, you can take action. And in a way, the very strong framing throughout the book on this opportunity lens as opposed to threat lens, which is, what can you do? How can you turn uncertainty, complexity into an opportunity, a challenge, or something you can step into? I think it's incredibly empowering. One question that follows from that for me is, how do these people sustain themselves? What are the ingredients for them to think and practice in this way? Is it that, you talked about earlier, it could be they've had experience earlier in their life and they've overcome obstacles, and there's a great example, many examples in the book of that, including a priest in London. I'll give a little taste for people to sort of go and buy the book and go and use it. But that moved me, that example. But it could be spiritual belief. Huh?
I rarely would say people should go buy this book, but man, if you're going to read the book, read it, if not just for the story of Fernando.
Fernando,
in London, and kind of the control. I still, a week doesn't go by that I don't stop and think about this young man who was born in a prison to, drug addicted parents, and grew up in a really difficult home, who, ended up conquering addiction, is now spending his life serving, and rather than serving time. And he really inspires me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was reading it and thinking, wow, what an individual. And I guess that question of what is it that nurtures and sustains these people? Is it a belief? Is it past history? Is it the way they lead their life? Is it healthy habits? Or did you get a sense of how people cognitively, emotionally, physically operate in this sense, and how they do it?
Well, I think a number of the impact players that I studied, wrote about, learned about, many of them came to their work with a sense of service, a service orientation,
right,
of, I'm here to serve. But I don't think that's the only way you can get there. I think of Joya Lewis, who also grew up in a pretty difficult environment in the state of Michigan, I believe. And what she found, so she grew up in a very difficult home, and she got a job washing dishes at a lunch place, a cafe. And when she was finished washing the dishes, like, she'd had these idle moments, and she would see the other employees out, like, clearing places, and she's like there with nothing to do. And so she's like, well, let me go offer to help. And so she goes, offers to help. And everyone's like, wow. And the restaurant owner's like, who asked you to do that? And she goes, I don't know. It just needed to be done. So I did it. And he's like, here's a raise. And here's someone who's just barely making it.
Yeah.
And I remember Joy telling me, she says, I learned that when I volunteered for more, I got recognized for this. I got rewarded for it. Like this was a path to success. So all throughout her career, when there's these opportunities to step up and lead, she's like, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And then you get like the success, the feel good of that, the recognition. And then people are like, there's a virtuous cycle that goes here.
Yes.
And people are giving you more responsibility and more recognition. And now you're like the clutch player that everyone goes to in the most critical moments. And then, by kind of signing up to do the work that really needs to be done and the hard work and taking bold action and diving into uncertainty, you're getting bigger and bigger responsibility and more influence. And some people use that influence to sort of rise through the ranks. And other people use that influence to sort of set their own terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Like, here's the kind of work I want to do. Here's what I'm good at. Here's how I want to contribute. And they're in this powerful position to shape their work environment. And so even if you don't come at this with this sense, which, I really want to be on a team and contribute to a team and serve, like this way of working, we're served by it. And so that would sustain people.
I love that. And it shows, and what you just said, and the book shows, there are impact players come in lots of forms, types from different backgrounds and work in context. It's not one type, which I think is both clearly would be wrong, but it's refreshing because then people can identify themselves. And one of the things that comes through the book and indeed my own experience of working with and for impact players, or they weren't called that term, but now I look at them through that lens, was they sort of get the stuff done in the short term. They deliver whatever the results are needed. They get stuff done which is necessary. But then their impact, their sort of multiplier, their sort of catalytic impact, whether it could be for the team, the organization, or indeed the system they're in, is significant as well. And that's hard because I've known a lot of people who are really head down. They deliver the numbers, and then you go, well, and then they move on. You think, well, what have they left? Or you get people who are so long term, and that people either get impatient and think, hey, by the way, we have to pay for what we're doing. I guess the balance is they can play the short and long term game, right? In terms of impact players. Do you see that?
Well, absolutely, because to be impactful, it's like not just in one moment, it's sustained over time. And there's a little term in the book that I just stumbled on while I was writing. Like it just kind of popped out of my head. And it was this idea of a win. What's important now?
Yes.
Like the cycle of contribution and recognition and reward that goes with all of this, it starts with being aware of what's important. But it's not just what's important in general, it's what's important now. And I think it's the thing that people really tune into, which is, what's the work of this organization? And do I understand what's important right now, like to my client, to my boss, to my stakeholders? And by doing this, what's important now, it's understanding, like, what can I do right in this moment that's going to contribute to something larger, that's going to build this momentum. Like, it's not, okay, what's the crisis right now and how do I just like get this thing done? So it's a sense of how do I contribute like a brick toward an important building?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So what do they give me? Let's get even more practical. So you're somebody listening, watching this and thinking, okay, I want to do that. What is it? What are the skills and mindsets and capabilities they need to show in terms of creating that brick and then creating, putting it in creating the next building? What do they do in practice? Well, give me some examples.
Yeah, let me give you probably an example from each one. So this idea of doing the job that needs to be done. If you want to kind of get on this path of greater impact, it's like get over the job that you're in and be constantly looking at what is the job? What is the real job that needs to be done? It's rarely like your job. And for me, I got this Oh, I don't know. I like to think of it as sort of like, a brick to the head moment early in my career where I was kind of gunning for a job. I wanted to teach management. And, I'm at Oracle. I don't know, it's an adolescent startup at the time. It's growing really rapidly. We're going from like 2,000 employees to 4,000 to 8,000 to 16,000 each year. We're growing larger and larger. And I have this opportunity to go interview for a job in the internal training group. And the group primarily, I don't know, 90+% of their energy was around running these boot camps for new hires, where, they were bringing in mostly people with computer science degrees out of top universities into the company. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that's what they do, but the company is growing so fast. Surely they're going to be adding management training to their charter. And I want to do that. So I went to interview for the job. I answered the VP's questions. He then, must give me probably gave me like an ounce of like space to take control of the interview. And I'm like, oh, so I kind of made my case for the company's growing really rapidly. People are getting thrown into management jobs or wreaking havoc on the group. Oracle needs a management boot camp and like, put me in, coach. Like, I can do this. I want to do it. And so I was like making myself available to him. And I was kind of expecting him to say like, fabulous. I see.
Yeah, start tomorrow. Yeah.
Go for it. Here's a budget. And he said, that's great, Liz, but your boss has a different problem. She's got to figure out how to get 2,000 new college graduates up to speed in Oracle technology in the next year. And what would be great is if you could help her do that.
Right.
I'm like, I don't want that job. I don't want to teach programming. I'm not a programmer. I know who we're hiring. We're hiring people out of MIT and Caltech and like the nation's top technology centers.
Yes.
I'm not good at that and I don't want to do it. And then I thought, wait a minute. He's telling me what's most important to the company right now.
Yes.
He's telling me what's important to him and to my would-be manager. So I actually think it's better for me if I work on what's important. And so it's this. And so I did. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get over myself. I'm going to do the job that's needed rather than the job that I want. And it turned out I was actually a pretty good technical instructor. And then.
But how did you get over it? How did you get over that? You had a strong, I believed your pitch. I mean, I'm here listening to it. I'm going, yeah, I'd buy it. But how did you mentally get over that? Hey, I want this job, but actually there's one that needs to be done. What did you do?
Well, I think a pivot. And so it's not like you leap into this new job. It's a pivot. And a pivot is, I'm going to just point in a different direction. So both these jobs involve teaching. I'm like, I don't want to teach technology. I have no passion for that. But I do care about teaching. And I could be a good technology instructor if I was humble enough to learn the technology.
Right.
And so it's like, we tend to do our best work. So much of my research over the years has pointed to this fact that we tend to do our best work when we're doing something we're natively good at, like a natural talent, pointed in a new direction. Like when we're a bit of a rookie at something we're brilliant at.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. Yeah.
When like an executive takes on a new division they know nothing about, they tend to be at their very best. And so I was like, well, I don't care about the zeros and the ones, but I do care about learning. That's something I'm passionate about. So I'm going to work passionately on what's important. And this really begins this chain reaction of impact, is being humble and being willing to subordinate ourselves. Now,
yes.
I choose that word carefully because I'm not suggesting anyone be subordinate. In fact, the impact player is kind of feisty. I bet there's a better term in the UK for feisty.
But we use it. I know.
Feisty. I figured there was a little bit more colorful term for this or something.
I'll think of one quickly. Go on.
Yeah. But it's not about being subordinate. it's about subordinating in some ways our, like, what's on our agenda.
Yeah, it's slightly. I got a big theme from your book about being less egotistical and more focused on the job that needs to be done, the work, the cause, whilst I'm being generous with others in terms of their contribution, but at the same time also making sure that people know of what you've done. So it's sort of not being so selfless that I'm completely at the back of the room, but at the other end of the spectrum, it's also not somebody who's doing all the great work, but effectively just says, hey, me, I'm the person. It's
Exactly.
that blend.
It is. And it's being kind of flexible about what we work on, but working with great gusto and making sure that our work is noticed.
Yes.
Yeah, it was certainly my own work experience that I'm like, I learned to say, I'll work on what's important, but I will never, ever let anyone take advantage of me or my work in that process.
Yeah, that's the empowerment theme again.
That would probably terrify you about, like, moments where I'm like, no, that's not okay. It's not okay to take credit for somebody else's work. It's not okay to and it's not okay to let yourself be run over inside an organization. Like, so being a little bit strong about that, being a little bit loose about where you contribute.
It's a sort of, this may not be the right term, but it feels like a sort of paradoxical role where actually, there's lots of paradoxes throughout, which is, there'll be a softness to the individual in terms of the generosity they may show in a particular context, but then immediately there may be a very hard call to be made, a decision that needs to be taken or a behavior to be called out in order to get that job done. And I guess it's that ability to pivot, to flick, to move and have that awareness. And one of the things that comes through a lot is that awareness of the situational awareness of themselves, and the systemic awareness, which, hey, but let's just pivot just for a moment about you. So come on, what do you do personally as an impact player yourself? What's the one trait you would call out of yourself?
Well, I've mentioned one and maybe spoken ad nauseum about it. So I'm pretty good at doing the job that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And serving where I'm needed rather than where I want. I'm pretty good at that. Let's talk about what I'm not good at. So
before we do that, sorry to call it out, I'm curious how, when you obviously have your own organization, you have your own group, how do you craft what needs to be done when obviously you're not in a big Oracle organization now, you're the CEO, you are owner of your own organization. How do you work out what the job needs to be done?
So, like, how do I work it out for myself, or how do I help my team know what that looks like?
A bit of both.
Well, I guess when I'm constantly looking, like, what's the most important work that I can be doing? I use sort of that. I've heard other people use this phrase. I use it a lot myself, is what is work that, like, work on what only you could do.
Yes.
And I said that wrong. David, help me with do only do what only you can do.
Yes, that's even better. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's it. And so I try to focus on putting my energy on work where I can add unique value.
Yeah, where you have a comparative and a distinctive advantage in a good way, that's how I would frame it as well.
And leading my own team, I think, okay, do I need to do this, or can someone else on the team do it? And I never ask, could I do it better? Because usually we tend to think we can do things better than other people, or like, oh yeah, I better hold on to this myself. I'm like, no, can someone else do this? Absolutely, let them do that. And more often than not, people surprise me and they do it not as well as me. They do it better than me. But I try to focus on, okay, only do the things where you offer a unique value add.
Yeah, I really like that.
What do we do as a team? It's like, how do we work in a way that we can create a series of wins in a direction?
Yes.
Not like, okay, here or there. And I have a term. I imagine I know, David, you come out of management consulting, but I have a term that I use with the team. I just used it last week, which is bad revenue, which is like,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Well, you can explain bad revenue, I think.
Well, it pays the bills, but doesn't do much for your identity and your shape.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you feel you have to take it, and actually sometimes you didn't. You just needed to be patient. And I've done it myself, or you think actually it's lucrative, or they were, showering compliments on you, and you think actually does it pass the test that you've effectively gone through, the filters you've just described in terms of advantage, and can I do the right type of work and so forth. But I'm conscious we're drawing to a close, and I don't want to test your patience too much. But you mentioned, we'll finish on a high, but you said there was one thing that perhaps you weren't so good at in terms of your humility. So what would that be in a nutshell?
A little bit wrong on that, because there are more than one things that I'm not so good at here, but maybe I'll focus on one. So, if I looked at the 5 impact players, and do the job that's needed, step up, step back, finish stronger, ask and adjust, and make work light. My relative challenge or weakness on this would be the ask and adjust. Like I'm the daughter of a very stubborn man. I inherited some stubbornness. If you need a ball carried across a finish line, I'm your girl. Yeah, like I think my best friend once said, someone asked, like, tell me about Liz. And she said, Liz never starts anything she doesn't finish. And it was just funny that like my friend from high school knew that about me. It's like, if I bite down on something,
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. So I'm stubborn and willful this way. I always finish what I start. But it could take me, like, I can, clamp down on something and keep going to the point where it's no longer relevant.
Right.
Or we really need to rethink this. So I'm trying to work more on stepping back and saying, where do we need to change? And, one of the things I loved about the impact player mentality, it's like they wake up each morning and they start their workday assuming that while they were sleeping, the world changed and that they need to change. They don't just like pick up and
That's
keep
a great
going.
mindset. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I need to find out what happened while I was asleep. And then I need to readjust my work constantly. It's almost like they work with the mentality of a violinist.
Yeah.
Who's before every performance tunes the instrument. Because it's so easy to fall out of tune with the delicate instrument like this. And I think that's this mentality that I'm trying to really adopt, is constantly ask, how can I make this work better? What can I do differently? It's
really fresh, isn't it? It's very fresh. It's questioning, but it's also, you have high expectations for yourself. You want to serve. Liz, I've loved this conversation. I've loved the book. It's enriching, it's stimulating, it's moving in places, and it's deeply practical and very, very extensively researched, as I mentioned. I highly, highly recommend it. Where can people find out more about the book, your work, and you?
So I'm pretty easy to find just on the interwebs.
Just Google you or whatever search engine. They'll find you.
Pretty easy to find. Our company website is thewisemangroup.com.
Yes.
And I should say that there's a wisemangroup.com, which is a far more interesting company. They're an interior design firm in San Francisco. And trust me, their work is way more beautiful than anything I do. But if you found like architecture design, you're in the wrong place. The Wiseman Group. And let me see, the book, you can get more information and a bunch of tools and resources, a quiz, like how you might be impeding your own impact. That's on impactplayersbook.com. And let me see, LinkedIn. You can
plenty of places. Hey,
Wiseman on Twitter. I'm there.
You've got it's fantastic. The resources around it, as I say, the frameworks in the book, the visuals, the result, and the great thing I really love about it is anyone can and should pick it up. This is not something a sort of 30-year veteran has. This is something that anyone, and that's why it's so inclusive and empowering. And I'm grateful for your time and your candor and your humor as well, Liz. It's been fantastic. So that was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. Please do subscribe to my podcast and YouTube channel, where you can listen and watch to other interesting interviews. So thank you, Liz. Thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for allowing me to be part of the conversation and be on the line. I like it.
Indeed. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.